Ethan Blackwood once promised her, "Stay with me. I'll give you the world." 6 years later, he did. He owned the skyline, the headlines, the rooms where power was decided. But the woman who stood beside him, through every unfinished dream, had become invisible, another silent fixture in a $40 million penthouse. That night, beneath crystal lights and flashing cameras, Ethan rested his hand on the waist of another woman. Applause followed. Glasses clinked. Smiles froze. No one noticed Maya Johnson, the woman who built him from nothing, until she turned away and walked out without a word. What no one knew was this, that quiet exit was the moment Ethan Blackwood began losing everything. The first time Maya Johnson realized she had become invisible was not in the penthouse, nor during the long, lonely nights when Ethan Blackwood worked past midnight. It happened much earlier, quietly, almost politely, on an afternoon when she overheard someone refer to her as Ethan's girlfriend. I think. The words lingered in the air, longer than they should have. Once. Maya had been the girl professors fought over. Her academic records were flawless, her recommendations glowing with a restrained kind of awe. She had been offered interviews, scholarships, futures that arrived neatly packaged with prestige and promise. Ivy League schools had circled her name like hawks. Back then, people spoke her name with certainty. Then Ethan had said, "We'll build something bigger together." He was standing in a half-lit garage at the time, sleeves rolled up, hands smudged with grease and ambition. His eyes were sharp, burning with the kind of hunger that made people believe. Maya had believed. She believed in the way only someone young and brilliant could fully, recklessly, without accounting for the cost. So she stayed. She deferred her enrollment, then withdrew, then stopped answering emails that asked about her future. The world she had been meant for quietly closed its doors, one by one, while she stood beside Ethan as his world opened instead. 6 years passed that way. 6 years in which Ethan Blackwood became a name spoken with admiration and caution. 6 years in which Maya became the woman who remembered everything: his schedules, his preferences, his silences. She learned how to read his moods by the way he loosened his tie, how to soothe his temper by saying nothing at all. She learned which nights he needed soup and which nights he needed space. She learned how to disappear gracefully. The penthouse overlooking Manhattan was finished in their 3rd year together. $40 million of glass, steel, and quiet power. Maya chose the furniture. She supervised the lighting. She memorized the city skyline from every angle. Though she rarely stepped onto the balcony, the view was Ethan's, not hers. She lived like a wife. She just never became one. No ring, no announcement, no introduction that went beyond convenience. When people asked, Ethan would smile faintly and say, "Maya's been with me a long time," as if she were part of the architecture. Maya never corrected him. The night everything ended began like any other night meant to celebrate Ethan. A private gala, invitation only, filled with people whose applause came easily and meant very little. Maya wore a black dress she had chosen weeks earlier, understated, elegant, designed not to compete. She stood 3 steps behind Ethan as he moved through the room, greeting investors, exchanging smiles, polished by practice. Then a woman appeared at his side. She was young, luminous in a way that demanded attention. her laughter bright and unburdened. When Ethan placed his hand on her waist, it was casual, so natural that no one questioned it. Cameras flashed. Applause rippled through the room like approval. Maya felt the shift before she understood it. The subtle redirection of gazes, the recalibration of assumptions. In that moment, she ceased to exist as anything other than background. She did not cry. She did not interrupt. She simply turned and walked out of the ballroom without a word. No one stopped her. Back at the penthouse, the silence waited. It always did. Ethan arrived an hour later, loosening his tie, already mentally elsewhere. He didn't notice Maya at first. When he did, his expression was neutral, almost relieved. "This doesn't need to be dramatic," he said. Pulling a checkbook from his jacket, he wrote quickly, efficiently, the way he signed contracts. The paper tore cleanly from the book. He placed the check on the counter and slid it toward her. "Take it. You've earned it." Earned it. As if 6 years could be measured in numbers. As if devotion were a service rendered. Maya stared at the check for a long time. Long enough for Ethan to grow impatient. Long enough for memories to line up quietly behind her late nights. Missed opportunities. The version of herself she had folded away for him. Then she smiled. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't sad. It was small, contained, and deeply unsettling. "Okay," she said. That was all. Ethan watched her with faint surprise, as if he had expected resistance. He said nothing else. He didn't ask where she would go. He didn't ask if she was all right. He had already closed the file in his mind. That night, Maya slept for the first time in weeks without waiting for a door to open. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. The city outside was hushed, suspended between night and day. She moved through the penthouse with quiet efficiency, packing only what mattered: documents, old notebooks, a laptop she had barely used in years. She did not take the art, the clothes, the things bought with Ethan's money. None of it belonged to her. She left the keys on the counter. By 8 a.m., she had exchanged the check. The number in her account was real, undeniable. It felt strangely irrelevant. By noon, she was gone. No note, no explanation, no dramatic goodbye. Ethan discovered her absence that evening. He stood in the penthouse, calling her name once, then stopping. He noticed the stillness, the way the air felt unused. Something in his chest tightened, though he dismissed it quickly. She would come back, he thought. They always did. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that Maya hadn't left because she was hurt. She had left because she had finally woken up. Because somewhere between becoming invisible and being paid to disappear, she had remembered who she was before the garage, before the promise, before the man who mistook her loyalty for permanence. And as the city lit up outside the windows of the penthouse she would never return to, one truth settled quietly into place. Maya Johnson hadn't lost everything that night. Ethan Blackwood had. Ethan Blackwood laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was the kind of restrained, confident smile he had worn his entire adult life, the smile of a man who had never been wrong for long. He lifted his glass. The city lights reflected in the crystal, and said to the men around him, almost casually, "She'll be back. They always come back." The words landed easily. No one questioned them. Why would they? Ethan Blackwood was not a man people left. He was a man people waited for, adjusted to, reshaped themselves around. He had built an empire from nothing. He knew how patterns worked. He knew how endings pretended to be beginnings. The first day after Maya left, he felt light, relieved, even. The penthouse was quieter, cleaner, unburdened by conversations that required patience. He woke when he wanted. He dressed without interruption. No questions, no silent looks, asking for something he didn't have time to give. He told himself this was what freedom felt like. He told himself he should have done this sooner. On the second day, he noticed the silence but dismissed it. Silence, after all, was a luxury. He worked longer hours, returned later than usual, poured himself a drink, and stared out at the skyline he owned, in every sense that mattered. He slept deeply, undisturbed. By the third day, the quiet began to feel different, not peaceful, empty. The penthouse echoed in a way it never had before. He found himself checking his phone without realizing it, expecting to see a message reminding him of something minor, something logistical. There was nothing. He shrugged it off. On the fourth day, his assistant asked if he'd like to reschedule a meeting he had missed that morning. Ethan frowned. The meeting had been on his calendar for months. He had never missed it before. He almost snapped, almost blamed someone else until he remembered, distantly, that Maya had always reminded him, casually, effortlessly, as if it were nothing. On the fifth day, his stomach burned. He waved it off at first, swallowing coffee on an empty stomach, pushing through the discomfort the way he always did. By noon, the pain sharpened. By evening, it was undeniable. He opened the cabinet above the sink, searching for the medication he took when the condition flared. It wasn't there. He searched another drawer, then another. His movements grew sharp, irritated. He finally found the bottle tucked behind a stack of files in his office. Expired. He stared at it longer than necessary, a flicker of unease passing through him before he forced it away. On the sixth day, he ordered takeout and ate half of it cold, standing by the counter. The food tasted wrong, too salty, too heavy. He barely finished. He left the rest untouched, something he had never done before. On the seventh day, he woke up late. Not because he had overslept, but because no one had woken him. There was no soft knock at the door. No quiet reminder about the early call with Tokyo. No voice saying his name in that careful, neutral tone that never demanded anything in return. His phone buzzed endlessly with missed notifications. The screen lighting up with consequences he wasn't used to managing alone. He sat on the edge of the bed, longer than he should have, irritation blooming into something sharper. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself this was adjustment, nothing more. But when he stood, the penthouse felt unfamiliar, like a place staged for someone else's life. He noticed things he had never noticed before. The way the light in the kitchen was slightly too harsh in the morning. The faint hum of the ventilation system he had once tuned out completely. The absence of movement where there had always been some quiet, purposeful, grounding. That afternoon, he reached for his phone. He didn't think about it. The motion was instinctive. He typed Maya's name, pressed call, and waited. It rang once, twice, then stopped, blocked. The screen told him nothing else. No explanation, no delay, just the sudden, unmistakable end of access. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then he laughed again, short, disbelieving. He told himself this was a tactic, a message. He had seen it before. Silence as leverage, distance as punishment. He had always outlasted it. Always. She's testing me, he muttered to no one. She'll cave. But that night, the laughter didn't come as easily. He sat alone at the dining table, the city glittering beyond the glass, untouched plates in front of him. He realized, with a faint edge of irritation, that he didn't know what time Maya usually ate when she was alone. He had never thought to ask. For the first time, the idea crossed his mind, not fully formed, not yet alarming that Maya might not be waiting at all. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. By the end of the week, the penthouse no longer felt like a reward. It felt like a showroom after closing hours, perfect, expensive, and entirely empty. Ethan found himself staying at the office later than necessary, dragging out meetings, answering emails that could have waited. He told himself he was busy. He told himself this was productivity. But late at night, when he finally returned, the silence followed him in. It pressed against him as he loosened his tie, as he poured another drink, as he stood by the window, staring down at a city that had once felt conquered and now felt distant. The thought came again, sharper this time, uninvited and unwelcome. What if she doesn't come back? He dismissed it immediately. Ethan Blackwood did not chase. He did not doubt. He did not lose. Yet somewhere beneath the certainty, something else had begun to take shape, an unfamiliar weight, a faint sense of imbalance. He didn't recognize it at first. He had never needed to. It was the feeling of being left behind, not replaced, not defeated, just left. And as the lights of Manhattan flickered below, indifferent to his presence, Ethan Blackwood experienced something entirely new, something he had never allowed anyone to give him before. Loneliness, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announced itself, but the quiet, creeping realization that someone had walked out of his life without asking permission, and that for the first time, he had no way to stop it. He told himself again, firmly, that she would come back. But the laughter had already faded, and somewhere across the city, a woman he thought he understood was already moving forward, carrying with her a future he no longer had access to. Maya Johnson returned quietly. There was no announcement, no dramatic re-entry, no attempt to reclaim anything she had once lost. On the morning she walked into the lecture hall, she looked like any other student, dark coat, hair pulled back, a notebook held close to her chest. No elaborate makeup, no carefully curated elegance, no trace of the life she had left behind in glass towers and private elevators, only clarity. She chose a seat near the back, close enough to see the board clearly, far enough to remain unnoticed. The lecture had already begun when she arrived, the low murmur of academic routine filling the room. Equations crowded the screen, half erased, half abandoned evidence of a problem that had resisted resolution for years. The professor paused, mid-sentence, eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the hall. His gaze lingered on Maya for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, something stirring behind his composed expression. Recognition came slowly, cautiously, as if he didn't dare trust it. Maya lowered her eyes. She listened. For the first time in 6 years. She wasn't listening for someone else's needs. She wasn't calculating schedules, anticipating moods, adjusting herself to fit another person's orbit. She listened with the kind of focus that had once defined her, the kind that stripped problems down to their bones and rebuilt them with ruthless precision. The equation on the board was familiar, too familiar. She had seen variations of it late at night years ago, scribbled in the margins of notebooks she never submitted, problems she worked through quietly while waiting for Ethan to come home. Back then, she had stopped halfway, telling herself it didn't matter, telling herself there would be time later. Later had finally arrived. When the professor asked if anyone had thoughts, the room remained still. Students avoided eye contact, their confidence worn thin by months of failure. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Maya raised her hand. It was a small motion, unassuming. Still, it broke the room open. The professor hesitated, surprised, then nodded. Yes. Maya stood. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, not loud, not tentative. She pointed out a flaw in the initial assumption, something subtle, something everyone else had accepted without question. She proposed a different approach, one that reframed the problem entirely. As she spoke, the equation shifted, not erased, but transformed. Each step logical, inevitable. The professor froze. The room leaned forward. Maya walked to the board at his invitation and finished the solution without hesitation, her handwriting precise, confident. The final line fell into place like a lock clicking shut. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the reverent kind. The professor stared at the board as if seeing it for the first time. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The truth of the solution stood on its own. A murmur rippled through the lecture hall. Students whispered, disbelief giving way to awe. Someone near the front turned to look at her openly, curiosity blazing. The genius who disappeared for 6 years. Someone murmured, almost reverently, "She's back." Maya returned to her seat without waiting for praise. She felt nothing like triumph, only a calm, grounding sense of alignment, as if a piece of herself, long thought lost, had clicked back into place. For the first time in years, she wasn't smaller than the room she stood in. After the lecture, the professor approached her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if startled. "Maya Johnson," he said, voice low. "I kept your file." She met his gaze. "I know." He studied her, 1,000 unasked questions in his eyes. "You're ready," he said finally, not as encouragement, as a fact. She nodded. By the end of the week, her name circulated through the department with quiet intensity. Not gossip, recognition. Professors requested meetings. Research groups asked questions that edged dangerously close to reverence. Maya answered politely, selectively, never overstating, never diminishing herself. She didn't mention where she had been. She didn't need to. What mattered was that she was here now, across the city. Ethan Blackwood remained unaware. He was busy untangling minor inconveniences, that had begun to accumulate in his life-missed meetings. Contracts that required more of his attention than usual. The nagging irritation of details he had once outsourced entirely. He didn't notice the absence of Maya's name from his thoughts as anything other than efficiency. He had moved on. He told himself. She would resurface when she was ready. But something had shifted. In academic journals. In faculty lounges. In conversations whispered between people who understood the weight of intellect. Maya Johnson's name began to surface again, this time standing alone. No one said Ethan Blackwood's former partner. They said brilliant. They said rare. They said we almost lost her. The world that had once closed its doors to Maya now opened them carefully, respectfully, as if aware of its earlier mistake. Opportunities returned, not as favors, but as acknowledgments long overdue. Maya accepted them without apology. She walked through campus with her shoulders squared, her presence unmissable in its restraint. People noticed her now, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't seek it. There was a gravity to her that couldn't be ignored. One evening, as she sat alone in the library, surrounded by books that felt like old friends, Maya allowed herself a brief moment of stillness. She thought not of Ethan, not of the life she had left, but of the girl she used to be, the one who had believed she could build something bigger without losing herself. She had been wrong then. She was right now. And while Ethan Blackwood stood beneath the illusion of control, unaware that the woman he had erased from his narrative was rewriting her own. One truth had already settled into place. Maya Johnson had returned to the world that had once claimed her. And this time, she was not standing behind anyone. Julian Hale appeared without announcement. He did not enter Maya Johnson's life at a moment of collapse. Nor did he arrive carrying solutions or sympathy. There was no dramatic interruption, no grand gesture timed to coincide with vulnerability. He simply became present quietly, persistently, in a way that did not demand attention. They first crossed paths in a narrow corridor outside the research wing, a place most people passed through without noticing. Maya was reviewing notes as she walked, her focus sharp, self-contained. Julian nearly collided with her, stopped in time, and apologized without embarrassment. He waited as she gathered herself, then stepped aside to let her pass. He didn't ask her name. That alone should have meant nothing, yet it stayed with her. Over the following weeks, he appeared again and again, not intrusively, not deliberately, sometimes in the library, seated 2 tables away, absorbed in his own work, sometimes at departmental talks, listening with an attentiveness that felt precise rather than performative. When Maya spoke, he listened not with admiration, not with judgment, but with a rare seriousness that suggested he understood the weight of what she was saying. He never mentioned Ethan Blackwood. Not once. Others did, subtly, carelessly, as people often do when they believe a name carries gravity. Julian never followed those conversational trails. He neither asked nor reacted. It was as if the man Maya had once built her life around simply did not exist in Julian's frame of reference. When he finally spoke to her at length, it was not about her past. It was about her work. They sat across from each other in a seminar room emptied of voices, the late afternoon sun casting long, deliberate shadows across the table. Maya had presented a draft of her research earlier that day, unfinished, raw, but unmistakably powerful. The room had buzzed with interest. Julian had said nothing. Now, He leaned back slightly, hands folded, eyes focused not on her, but on the equations she had scrawled across the pages. "Your work deserves daylight," he said. It wasn't praise. It wasn't encouragement. It was an observation. Maya looked at him carefully. People often said kind things when they wanted something. Julian's tone suggested no such intent. There was no urgency in his voice, no attempt to pull her closer. "I'm aware," she replied. A faint smile touched his mouth, not amusement, but recognition. Good. From that moment on, a quiet rhythm formed between them. Julian offered critique when it was needed. He challenged assumptions, asked questions that forced clarity, pointed out weaknesses without attaching them to her worth. He never softened his intelligence to make her comfortable, never inflated it to impress. When Maya disagreed, he listened. When she was right, he accepted it without hesitation. He did not attempt to mentor her. He did not position himself above her. He stood beside her. What unsettled Maya most was what Julian did not do. He did not try to rescue her from her past. He did not frame her story as one of survival. He did not speak of wasted years or lost potential. He treated her as someone who had arrived precisely where she was meant to be. In his presence, she felt no need to explain herself. They worked late some nights, silence stretching comfortably between them, punctuated only by the occasional scratch of pen against paper or the hum of fluorescent lights. Julian never assumed her time belonged to him. When she packed up to leave, he nodded and returned to his work without protest. Once, as they exited the building together, Maya realized something that unsettled her more than admiration ever could. Julian did not need her, not emotionally, not professionally, not symbolically. Whatever interest he held was grounded, self-contained, untouched by hunger or lack. He was not leaning toward her to fill a space in himself. He was standing where he was, inviting her to do the same. She did not know who Julian Hale was beyond the campus. She did not ask. No one volunteered information. He dressed simply. He drove an unremarkable car. His office, when she eventually saw it, was functional and sparse. Books lined the shelves, not awards. What she didn't know, what no one around her seemed to know, was that Julian Hale was the sole heir to Hale Industries, a conglomerate whose influence ran quietly through finance, technology, and policy, a name that commanded rooms without ever raising its voice. Julian kept that name folded neatly away. To Maya, he was just Julian, the man who respected her mind without trying to claim it. For the first time since she had returned, Maya noticed a shift in herself. Not dependence, not infatuation, something steadier. She found herself anticipating conversations, not because they made her feel seen, but because they sharpened her thinking. She left their discussions energized, not depleted. One evening, after a particularly grueling debate over a theoretical framework, Maya paused before leaving the room. "You never asked," she said. Julian looked up. "Asked what?" "Why I disappeared." She replied, "Why I'm here now." He considered her for a moment, expression thoughtful but unguarded. "If you want to tell me, I'll listen," he said. "If you don't, I won't imagine reasons on your behalf." The simplicity of the statement struck her harder than any confession could have. She nodded once. "That's enough." As the weeks passed Maya's work gained momentum. Invitations followed, carefully worded, respectfully framed. Julian watched from the margins, never stepping in, never inserting himself into her rising narrative. When others began to speak of her brilliance with awe, Julian did not change. When her name carried weight, he did not lean closer. And that was the difference. Julian Hale did not save Maya Johnson. He did not pull her from darkness or lift her into light. He simply recognized that she was already standing there and chose to stand with her, without fear of being eclipsed. Unbeknownst to Ethan Blackwood, whose world was slowly contracting under the illusion of control. A different kind of power was forming across the city, not loud, not aggressive, but steady, inevitable. Maya Johnson was no longer walking alone, and the man beside her was not a rescuer, not a rival, not a replacement. He was something far more dangerous to the life Ethan had built. He was a witness. Ethan Blackwood found out about Maya Johnson the way he found out about everything that mattered through a report delivered without emotion. A briefing folder, crisp and efficient, slid across the conference table by an assistant who did not look him in the eye. Between market projections and regulatory updates, one line caught his attention, almost casually placed, as if it did not have the power to disrupt him. National Research Fellowship, final nominee, Maya Johnson. For a fraction of a second, Ethan thought it was a coincidence. Another Maya Johnson, a common enough name. But the attached profile eliminated all doubt. The academic history, the gap years, the research focus that mirrored unfinished work he had once glimpsed, scribbled in notebooks she kept hidden. His fingers tightened around the page. So that was where she had gone. Not drifting, not floundering, not waiting, building something of her own. The realization landed with an unexpected sharpness. For weeks, Ethan had told himself Maya's silence was temporary, strategic. He had assumed distance was her way of negotiating, that she would reappear when she was ready to be reasonable. This was something else entirely. This was independence. He dismissed the rest of the meeting early. By the time he left the building, his decision had already formed, solid and unquestioned. He would see her. He would remind her of who he was, of what they had been, of what she was giving up. He chose his suit carefully that morning, tailored, understated, the kind that spoke of money without announcing it. He used the same cologne he had worn for years, the one she used to like, the one she had once said made him smell like certainty. He arrived exactly on time, because punctuality had always been part of his power. The campus was alive with quiet momentum when he stepped onto it. Students passed him without recognition, absorbed in their own lives. Ethan noted the absence with mild irritation. He had grown accustomed to being noticed. He found her outside the research building, seated on the steps with a notebook balanced on her knee. She looked different, not in ways he could immediately catalog. There was no visible transformation, no dramatic shift in appearance, but something about her posture still, assured, made her seem less accessible, as if she occupied a space he no longer understood. "Maya," he said. She looked up. For a moment, he searched her face for something: surprise, resentment, relief. He found none of it. Her expression was calm, almost distant, as if she were seeing him not as a force returning to her life, but as a memory that had already been filed away. Ethan. she replied. She did not stand. That, more than anything else, unsettled him. I heard about the fellowship, he said, forcing warmth into his voice. Congratulations. Thank you, she said simply. He gestured toward the building behind her. You've done well. The words felt inadequate the moment they left his mouth. He adjusted, instinctively shifting tactics. Come back, he said. We can talk somewhere private. I'll fix everything. There it was. The offer. The promise. The assumption that problems were objects he could rearrange until they suited him. Maya closed her notebook slowly. She stood, not hurried, not defensive, meeting his gaze at eye level. For the first time since he arrived, Ethan felt something subtle, but undeniable, a recalibration. You don't fix people you broke on purpose, she said. The words were quiet, measured, delivered without anger. They landed harder than any accusation could have. Ethan stared at her, momentarily wrong-footed. That's not fair, he said, too quickly. I never meant to. I know. Maya interrupted. That's the point. She turned slightly, as if preparing to leave, then paused. You didn't hurt me because you were cruel. She continued. You hurt me because you didn't think I could leave, because you assumed I would adapt, because it was easier not to see me. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He was used to arguments, to negotiations that bent toward his will. This wasn't either. I gave you everything, he said finally. Opportunities, security, a life most people would kill for. Maya looked at him with something that bordered on pity, though it carried no condescension. You gave me a life where I stopped existing outside of you. She stepped back, creating distance he could not cross. I'm not angry anymore, she said. That's why this won't work. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. He had prepared for resistance, for emotion, for leverage. He had not prepared for indifference. Not this kind, the kind that came from resolution rather than fatigue. You don't understand what you're walking away from, he said, his voice sharpening despite himself. Maya smiled then, not softly, not kindly, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. I do, she said. I walked away from it 6 weeks ago. Students passed them now, some glancing curiously at the tension they could not name. Ethan became aware, suddenly, of his surroundings, of the fact that this was not his world. Not anymore. You think this? He gestured vaguely at the building, at the campus, at the version of her life he could not control. You think this will last? Maya met his gaze without flinching, longer than us did. That was when it happened. Not all at once, not dramatically. Ethan realized she wasn't afraid of him, not of his money, not of his influence, not of the life he had once represented as irreplaceable. The power he had wielded so effortlessly over her for years had dissolved, not because she had found someone else, not because she had hardened herself against him, but because she no longer needed his approval to exist. He had lost her long before this conversation. This was just the moment he finally understood it. Maya picked up her notebook and turned away, leaving him standing alone on unfamiliar ground. She did not look back. Ethan remained where he was for several seconds after she disappeared into the building. His reflection stared back at him from the glass doors, immaculate, controlled, unchanged. Yet something fundamental had fractured beneath the surface. For the first time, the thought surfaced without immediate dismissal. She isn't coming back. And beneath that, darker and more unsettling, she never belonged to me. As he walked away from the campus, the world seemed to continue without acknowledging his presence, indifferent to the man who had once believed himself irreplaceable. Somewhere behind him, a door closed, not loudly, not violently, but with finality. Ethan Blackwood had come to reclaim what he thought was his. What he found instead was proof that it never had been. The rumor did not arrive loudly. It crept in, the way poison always does, softly, plausibly, wrapped in language that pretended to ask questions rather than make accusations. Maya Johnson slept her way to the top. At first, it appeared as a comment beneath an article celebrating the finalists of the National Research Fellowship. Then it multiplied, reshaped, sharpened. Screenshots circulated. Anonymous accounts whispered certainty. Phrases like sources say and people familiar with the matter did their quiet work. By morning, it was everywhere. Social media passed judgment with the confidence of strangers who believed proximity to a headline counted as knowledge. Threads unraveled her achievements into insinuations. Her name trended not alongside her research, but beside speculation about who she must have been involved with, what doors she must have opened in private to earn what she could not possibly deserve in public. The media followed eagerly. Reporters camped outside the university gates, microphones ready, questions sharpened for spectacle rather than truth. Headlines abandoned caution. They preferred implication. They preferred scandal that fit an old narrative too familiar to require evidence. A brilliant woman was never just brilliant. There was always a reason people could accept more easily. Maya learned about it between meetings. A message from a colleague, a missed call from the department head, a sudden, uncomfortable shift in the way people looked at her in the hallway. Too careful, too curious, too cautious. She opened her phone and saw her name framed by lies, repeated until they felt heavy enough to bend reality. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She closed the screen and finished her work. That was what unsettled people most. Ethan Blackwood read the headlines in his office, late at night, city lights blinking indifferently beyond the glass. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, scanning the articles with a detached focus that masked something sharper underneath. He didn't fully believe it, but he didn't dismiss it either. A part of him, small, insidious, leaned into the possibility. It whispered that this made sense, that ambition always had a cost, that Maya's rise had been too fast, too clean, that perhaps she had found leverage elsewhere after all. He told himself he was being rational. He told himself doubt was reasonable. He did not realize that this hesitation, this refusal to stand firmly on her side, was the final cut. Not because he had accused her outright, but because, after everything, he still found it easy to question her integrity. Maya felt the shift before she saw him again. When she entered a conference room 2 days later, conversation stopped, not abruptly, politely, carefully. She took her seat without acknowledging it, opened her notebook, and prepared to speak. When she finished presenting, the applause was muted, respectful, uncertain. She left without comment. Julian Hale watched all of this quietly. He did not rush in. He did not confront Maya with concern or consolation. He observed patterns, traced origins, asked questions no one else thought to ask. While the internet dissected her character, Julian dissected the lie. He did not believe it for a second. Not because of loyalty, not because of emotion, because the evidence didn't align. The timeline was wrong, the sources too vague. The accounts feeding the story shared connections, subtle, buried, but traceable. Julian followed the threads patiently, methodically, the way one does when truth is a matter of process rather than outrage. Within 48 hours, the shape of the lie revealed itself. A small group, coordinated releases, fabricated screenshots, anonymous tips funneled through the same intermediary. Not random cruelty, intentional sabotage. Julian made a call, then another. By the third call, the narrative began to fracture. Journalists received corrections from legal departments. Editors quietly pulled articles pending review. Accounts went silent. One by one, the pillars holding the rumor upright collapsed under scrutiny. The truth emerged slowly, inevitably. The accusations were false, the evidence manufactured, the motive transparent. When the full exposé broke, it did not scream. It didn't need to. The facts spoke with a clarity that left no room for argument. Names were named, connections revealed, consequences followed. Those who had tried to profit from Maya's destruction found themselves standing alone in the light they had intended for her. Maya learned what Julian had done after the storm passed. They sat across from each other in the same seminar room where they had first spoken at length. The windows open now, the air lighter. She had not asked for help. He had not asked for permission. They tried to bury you. Julian said simply, they forgot you were fire. Maya absorbed the words in silence. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she exhaled slowly, deliberately. You didn't have to, she said. Julian met her gaze. I know. That was the difference. He hadn't stepped in to save her. He had stepped in because injustice offended him on principle. Because lies, once weaponized, demanded response. Because standing beside someone did not require their collapse. Maya nodded once, understanding settling between them like a quiet accord. Across the city, Ethan Blackwood read the retractions. He felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Relief. Yes, but threaded through with something uglier. Regret. The realization that when it mattered, when the world had sharpened its knives, he had hesitated. He had not defended her. He had waited to see which version of her would survive. And that knowledge settled into him with the weight of finality. Maya returned to her work with renewed focus, not because the rumor had strengthened her, but because it had clarified something essential. She no longer wondered who would stand when things turned hostile. She no longer confused proximity with loyalty. The lie that should have destroyed her had failed, not because she fought it loudly, not because she pleaded her case, but because truth, when met with resolve and precision, proved stronger than spectacle. As Maya walked through campus in the days that followed, heads turned again. This time, not with suspicion, but with something closer to respect. The narrative had shifted. Not into praise, she did not need that, but into recognition. She had endured. She had remained intact. And somewhere, far from the place he once dominated, Ethan Blackwood understood with unsettling clarity that the woman he had doubted no longer belonged to any version of his world. The fire he had underestimated had already burned past him. The revelation did not come as gossip. It arrived in a room built for authority. The academic council chamber was rarely full. When it was, people spoke carefully, aware that words carried weight there. Maya sat at the long table with the other researchers, her notes organized, her mind focused on the agenda. The storm of the past weeks had receded, leaving behind a strange clarity. She had returned to equilibrium. That was enough. Then the doors opened. Conversation stilled, not abruptly, but with a subtle shift, as if the air itself had adjusted. Heads turned. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people rose, almost instinctively. Julian Hale stepped inside. He looked the same composed posture, the same unremarkable suit, the same quiet presence that never demanded attention. Yet the reaction around him was unmistakable. Members of the council stood without prompting. Senior professors straightened. A few exchanged quick glances that carried recognition and something close to respect. Maya frowned slightly. She had never seen this room react to anyone that way. Julian acknowledged the room with a nod, neither hurried nor indulgent. When his name was announced, it carried a different cadence. Julian Hale, representative of the Hale Foundation, primary stakeholder. The name settled into the space like a final piece clicking into place. Maya's breath caught. Just barely. Hale. The foundation funded entire research wings, shaped policy through grants, redirected the trajectory of institutions without appearing to intervene at all. Hale Industries operated in layers: technology, infrastructure, finance quietly embedded in the systems that kept power circulating. It was not a name spoken lightly. Julian took his seat. Only then did the room sit again. Maya looked at him, searching for something: explanation, apology, acknowledgement. He met her gaze calmly, as if this were not a reveal at all, but a formality that had finally arrived. The meeting proceeded, though its rhythm had shifted. Proposals were presented, votes taken. When Julian spoke, it was measured, precise. He did not dominate the conversation. He did not assert control. Yet when he expressed support for Maya's work, the room responded instantly, as if alignment had already been decided. Approval came without debate. It was over before Maya fully processed it. Afterward, as people filtered out, whispers followed Julian, not about his wealth, not about his influence, but about his restraint, about how rarely he appeared in person, about what it meant that he had chosen to do so now. Maya waited until they were alone. "You're Hale," she said finally. Julian nodded. "Yes." She searched his face, half expecting something to change. It didn't. There was no triumph there, no anticipation of reaction. "You didn't tell me," she said. "You didn't ask." He replied gently. The simplicity of the exchange disarmed her more than any justification could have. "You could have ended everything sooner." Maya said, "The rumors, the interference. You had the power." Julian considered her words carefully. "I did end them," he said. "When they crossed a line, you could have prevented them." "Yes." The admission was quiet, unadorned. "Why didn't you?" she asked. Julian met her gaze steadily. "Because power used too early doesn't protect, it protects," he said. "It replaces. And I wasn't here to replace your voice." The answer settled between them, heavy, with meaning. Maya thought of the weeks he had spent beside her, challenging her work, listening without judgment, never once positioning himself as her shield. She thought of the silence he had allowed her to own, the way he had waited until she was attacked before stepping forward. He had not erased her struggle. He had honored it. Across the city, Ethan Blackwood received the news with far less ceremony. The briefing was shorter this time. No folders, no slides, just a single line delivered with careful neutrality. Hale Industries has formally endorsed Maya Johnson's research initiative. Ethan froze. Hale. The name landed with immediate force. This was not a competitor. This was not a rival to be outmaneuvered. Hale Industries did not engage in visible battles. They altered landscapes quietly, permanently. Their support could lift careers or dismantle them without leaving fingerprints. And Julian Hale, the man Maya stood beside. Ethan's jaw tightened as realization sharpened into something darker. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't charity. This was alignment. And it was devastatingly clear what that alignment meant. Julian Hale had the power to dismantle Ethan's empire if he chose to. Not through force, through redirection, through influence so subtle it would look like natural consequence. Yet he hadn't done it. Not yet. That restraint unsettled Ethan more than open hostility ever could. Back on campus, Maya walked with Julian beneath trees, just beginning to turn. Students passed them, unaware of the shift that had occurred not just in status, but in balance. "You could have told me," Maya said again, softer this time. Julian stopped walking. He turned to face her fully. "If I had," he said, "you would have wondered whether every door that opened afterward did so because of you or because of me." She didn't respond immediately. "That doubt," he continued, "would have stayed with you. I wouldn't do that to you." The words struck deeper than she expected. For years, Ethan's power had shaped her reality without asking. It had decided for her what was reasonable, what was possible, what she owed. Julian's power, vast and undeniable, had done the opposite. It had waited. Maya exhaled slowly. "You only used it when I was attacked." "Yes, and never to claim me." Julian's expression softened. "Just slightly. I don't claim people." Something in her chest shifted, subtle, irreversible. She had mistaken safety for control once before. She would not make that mistake again. But this was different. This was power that did not shrink her space. Power that understood the difference between protection and possession. As they resumed walking, Maya realized that the man beside her was not defined by the authority he carried, but by the discipline with which he withheld it. That, more than wealth, more than influence, was what moved her. Because for the first time, she stood beside someone whose power did not cast a shadow over her own. And somewhere beyond the campus, Ethan Blackwood understood that the rules had changed. He had built his life believing power was something to display, to leverage, to hold over others. Julian Hale proved otherwise. Power, when revealed, did not need to roar. It only needed to choose its moment. And when it did, it changed everything. Ethan Blackwood's downfall did not arrive with sirens or headlines. It began quietly, the way rot always does. hidden beneath polished surfaces, spreading patiently while appearances held. The first partner withdrew without explanation. A scheduled call was postponed, then canceled. Emails grew shorter. Tone cooled. The reason, when it finally came, was wrapped in language that sounded neutral, but felt unmistakably final, a strategic realignment. Ethan read the message twice, irritation flickering briefly before confidence reasserted itself. Partnerships shifted all the time. He had survived worse. Then another followed. This time, the withdrawal was public. A statement released before Ethan could shape the narrative. Investors took notice. Analysts speculated. The markets did not panic, but they paused in hesitation. Ethan knew, was more dangerous than fear. Within weeks, the questions began, not accusations, inquiries, the kind that arrived politely but demanded answers. He was no longer accustomed to giving. His credibility, once unquestioned, now required reassurance. Meetings stretched longer. Negotiations tightened. He found himself explaining decisions he had once made without scrutiny. Power, he realized too late, was not lost all at once. It eroded. The woman he had been seeing stopped calling. At first, Ethan barely noticed. She had always existed on the periphery of his life, an indulgence more than a presence. When he did reach out, her reply was brief, carefully worded. She wished him well. She had opportunities elsewhere. She preferred not to complicate things. She did not look back. Friends followed, slowly, predictably. Invitations stopped arriving. Dinners became solitary. The laughter he once heard in rooms full of familiar faces felt distant, almost imagined. Those who remained spoke cautiously, eyes measuring, calculating how close was too close. Ethan watched it happen with growing disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had built Blackwood Tech with ruthless precision. He had known when to take risks, when to cut losses, when to discard what no longer served him. People respected that. They relied on it. They trusted him because he never hesitated. Until now. The whispers grew louder, not about Maya, about him, about leadership, about judgment, about whether Ethan Blackwood still commanded the certainty he once did. His name, once synonymous with inevitability, now carried an unspoken question mark. Late one night, alone in his office, Ethan stared at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows that suddenly felt less like conquest and more like distance. The lights no longer energized him. They reminded him of something else, something missing. He thought of Maya, not as she had been at the end, standing across from him with calm indifference, but as she had been years earlier, sitting on the floor of a half-finished office, surrounded by cables and blueprints, quietly solving problems he didn't have the patience to think through. He remembered how often she had adjusted her plans to accommodate his, how easily she had stepped aside when he took center stage, how rarely he had noticed what that cost her. 6 years. 6 years of assuming she would stay, because she always had. He replayed the moments now with a clarity that bordered on cruelty. The missed dinners, the casual dismissals, the way he had framed her sacrifices as choices she made willingly, never as concessions extracted over time. Maya hadn't left him. He had been pushing her away in increments so small They felt insignificant until they weren't. The realization settled heavily, stripping away the last illusion he clung to. He had not been betrayed. He had not been abandoned. He had engineered his own loss with methodical indifference. Across the city, Maya Johnson continued to rise. Ethan saw her name again, not linked to scandal, not to him, but to progress, to breakthroughs, to conferences where her presence was anticipated, her voice respected. The articles spoke of her work with measured admiration, no qualifiers, no footnotes explaining how she had arrived there. She stood alone. That, more than anything else, unsettled him. He had believed power was something one held over others, something that bent people into alignment. Julian Hale's restraint had already shaken that belief. Maya's success without him shattered it completely. Ethan began to understand what he had mistaken for control had been dependence in disguise. His empire had been built on her steadiness, her patience, her ability to absorb his excesses without complaint. When she left, she did not take assets or influence. She took balance. Without it, everything tilted. By the time the board requested a private meeting off the calendar, unannounced, Ethan knew what it meant. They spoke carefully, respectfully, but the message was unmistakable. Confidence had eroded. Leadership required reassessment. His role, once unquestioned, was now conditional. He nodded. He listened. He agreed where agreement was demanded. The man who had never compromised found himself negotiating his own relevance. That night, alone in the penthouse he rarely visited anymore, Ethan poured a drink and did not finish it. He wandered through rooms that felt staged for someone else's life, touching surfaces chosen by someone who had once cared deeply about the space they shared. Maya's absence was everywhere. Not in objects those could be replaced, but in intention, in the quiet order she had imposed without recognition, in the way she had made room for him to expand while slowly erasing herself. He sat down heavily, the weight of recognition pressing into his chest. She had not been weak. She had been generous. And he had mistaken generosity for permanence. Ethan Blackwood had lost partners, credibility, power. He had lost the shallow allegiance of those who followed success without loyalty. But those losses, painful as they were, paled beside the one he could no longer undo. He had lost the woman who once believed in him when no one else did. Not because she failed him, but because he failed to see her. And as the city outside continued without him, indifferent, relentless Ethan understood, with devastating clarity, that his fall had not begun the moment Maya walked away. It had begun long before. It had begun the first time he chose himself over her. And he had been falling ever since. Ethan Blackwood knelt down, not in a boardroom, not beneath the cold lights of a press conference. There were no cameras, no advisors waiting at a distance, no audience prepared to translate the moment into strategy or spectacle. There was only a quiet room with unadorned walls, a window half open to the late afternoon air, and Maya Johnson, standing a few feet away. For the first time in his life, Ethan did not arrive with leverage, no contracts, no offers, no assurances wrapped in power and phrasing. He had come stripped of the tools that had always protected him from vulnerability. What remained felt unfamiliar, almost unbearable. His knee touched the floor before he fully registered the movement. The gesture was instinctive, uncalculated. It startled even him. Maya did not step back. She did not step forward either. She watched him with a stillness that felt heavier than anger ever had. Ethan lifted his head. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse, uneven, as if each word had to be pulled from somewhere deeper than habit. "I didn't lose you because you found someone better," he said. He paused, breath catching, the admission settling into the space between them. "I lost you because I was worse than the man I pretended to be." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of memory, of recognition, of things finally named after years of avoidance. Ethan stayed where he was, refusing the instinct to fill the gap with explanation. This was not a negotiation. It was a confession. Maya looked at him for a long time. She searched his face, not for sincerity. She had already learned how easy that could be to counterfeit, but for understanding, for the presence of something that had never existed between them before. There was no anger in her expression, no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet composure that told Ethan what he needed to know before she ever spoke. "I stayed 6 years hoping you'd change," she said calmly. "I won't stay another second asking you to." The words were not raised. They were not sharpened. They did not need to be. They landed with finality. Ethan felt something inside him collapse, not dramatically, not all at once, but in layers. He had rehearsed apologies in his head for weeks, crafting variations that acknowledged fault while leaving room for redemption. None of them mattered now. This was not about forgiveness. It was about time already spent, and time she would never give again. "I know," he said quietly. He did not reach for her. He did not promise anything. Promises had lost their currency. "I know." Maya exhaled, slow and steady. "This is the first time you've actually heard me," she said, "and it's too late." He nodded. For years. He had mistaken Maya's silence for agreement, her patience for acceptance. He had assumed her loyalty was proof of permanence. Only now did he understand what it had cost her to remain. Remaining, he realized, had been her last act of love. Leaving had been her first act of self-respect. He lowered his gaze. The position he had once found intolerable, now feeling deserved. "I thought fixing things meant putting them back where they were," he admitted. "I didn't understand that what was broken was the way I saw you." Maya's eyes softened slightly, not with affection, but with recognition. "You saw me," she said. "You just didn't think you had to keep seeing me. That was it. The truth. Stripped bare." Ethan let the words settle. He did not defend himself. There was nothing left to defend. He felt the full weight of what he had done, not as guilt, but as clarity. The clarity that came when illusion finally failed. Slowly, he rose to his feet. Standing again did not restore him. It only marked the end of the moment. "I won't come back," Maya said, not unkindly, not now, not later, not in another version of this. "I know," Ethan replied. They stood facing each other for a brief, suspended instant. Two people who had once built a life out of proximity, now separated by something far more decisive than distance. Ethan turned away first. As he walked toward the door, each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the space he crossed, but because of the understanding he carried with him. He reached for the handle, paused, then spoke without turning back. I hope you never have to make yourself smaller for anyone again. Maya did not answer immediately. I won't, she said finally. The door closed behind him without sound. Ethan walked down the hallway, past walls that bore no memory of him, into a world that no longer rearranged itself around his presence. The air outside felt colder than he expected, or perhaps he was simply no longer insulated from consequence. He did not look back. What he carried with him was heavier than failure, heavier than loss. It was regret stripped of hope, the knowledge that some things, once understood, arrive too late to be undone. For the first time, Ethan Blackwood did not try to outrun that weight. He let it settle. And in that acceptance, incomplete and painful as it was, the man who had once believed power could repair anything finally understood the one truth that would follow him for the rest of his life. Some losses are not punishments. They are conclusions. 1 year later, the name Maya Johnson appeared on the cover of the most respected scientific journal in the United States. The photograph was understated. No dramatic styling. No attempt to soften or glamorize her. She stood in profile, eyes focused somewhere beyond the frame, expression calm, assured. The headline beneath her name spoke only of work of theory, of contribution, of a breakthrough that had shifted an entire field forward. There was no mention of who she had once been to anyone else. Inside the article, her story was told with precision. A prodigy who had vanished. A return no one expected. A body of work so rigorous, it silenced doubt. She was described not as resilient, not as inspirational, but as formidable. The language mattered. Maya noticed that. She had learned long ago how easily praise could disguise condescension. She did not keep the magazine. She read it once, carefully, then set it aside and returned to her notes. That same year, she became the youngest researcher ever invited to deliver a keynote address at an international scientific conference. The auditorium was vast, its architecture designed to amplify voices, meant to carry authority. When Maya stepped onto the stage, the room stilled, not because she demanded it, but because attention followed her naturally now. She spoke without embellishment. She spoke of questions unanswered, of systems misunderstood, of the responsibility that came with discovery. She did not tell a story of survival. She did not frame her success as triumph over adversity. She spoke as someone who belonged exactly where she stood, in the audience. No one whispered her past. No one referred to her as a former partner of anyone. The name Ethan Blackwood did not surface in conversation, did not trail behind her accomplishments like a shadow. Whatever association had once defined her had dissolved completely, rendered irrelevant by the clarity of her presence. In the back row of the auditorium, Julian Hale sat quietly. He had chosen the seat deliberately, not hidden, not prominent. He did not arrive early. He did not leave late. He did not stand when she took the stage. He simply watched, hands folded loosely, posture relaxed, attention absolute. When the applause came, he joined it not loudly, not immediately. His claps were measured, steady, unmistakably proud. He did not look around to see who noticed him. This moment was not about him. After the address, as people clustered around Maya with questions and congratulations, Julian waited at the edge of the room. He did not interrupt. He did not signal. When she finally stepped away, he met her without ceremony. "You don't need me to stand behind you anymore," he said. Maya smiled, not with surprise, not with relief, but with quiet amusement. "I never did." They walked out together, unhurried, leaving the hum of admiration behind them. That evening, Manhattan stretched out beneath them from the rooftop of her apartment building, lights scattered like constellations, mapped by human ambition. The city felt different at night, less demanding, more honest. Maya leaned against the railing, a glass of water untouched in her hand, the breeze lifting loose strands of her hair. Julian stood beside her, silent for a long moment. "I love you," he said finally, not rushed, not cautious, simply spoken, not because you need me, but because you choose yourself every day. Maya did not answer immediately. She looked out over the city, thinking not of the words themselves, but of the space in which they had been spoken. No urgency, no expectation, no invisible contract attached. Then she turned to him. "I love you too," she said clearly, "because with you, I don't have to disappear to be loved." There was no proposal, no promise shaped for an audience that didn't exist, no declarations about forever, just understanding. They stood together as equals, neither leading nor following, each grounded in a life that no longer required sacrifice, as proof of affection. Months later, Maya signed a long-term teaching and research contract with an American institution that valued her not as an asset, but as a voice. The office they gave her was modest, functional, filled with light. She arranged it herself. Books where she wanted them. Space left intentionally open. Julian stepped back from daily operations at Hale Industries, transferring authority to a board he trusted. He kept his word without announcement, without applause. When asked why, he answered simply, "Power should never be louder than love." Evenings became something else entirely. The apartment filled with warm light and the quiet rhythms of shared life. Maya often stood by the balcony with a book, absorbed, unbothered by the passage of time. Julian cooked clumsily at first. Then, with growing confidence, he followed recipes carefully, adjusted slowly, learned patience the same way he had learned restraint. Some nights they spoke of work. Other nights they spoke of nothing at all. There was no need to fill the space. One evening, as Julian set a slightly overcooked pan aside, Maya closed her book and looked at him. Her expression was thoughtful, reflective, almost tender. "I didn't lose a billionaire," she said. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Waiting. I gained a life." He smiled, not with pride, not with possession, but with recognition. "And I gained a woman who never belonged to anyone," he replied, "but herself." Later, when the city quieted and the lights dimmed, Maya stood alone on the balcony for a moment longer. She thought of the girl she had once been, the one who believed love required disappearance, that building someone else's world was the same as sharing one. She had been wrong. The story had not been about survival. It had been about return. Return to voice, to intellect, to self. Inside. Julian turned off the stove and joined her without comment. Presence easy, unclaimed. Together, they looked out at the city, not as conquerors, not as symbols, but as two people who had chosen clarity over fear. And in that stillness, the truth settled into place, complete and unchallenged. Love isn't about who gives you the world. It's about who never cages you in it.